This book is part of a series that started with the flagship Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0 in September 2022. It focuses on the American project led by Harvard University to dismantle the Indian Institutes of Technology, IITs, and other institutions of excellence in India. Our evidence-based rebuttal gives IITians and other engineers the toolkit to tackle false accusations of being casteist bigots. Toxic Breaking India ideas have serious consequences for every Indian. The goal of such forces is to dismantle all these structures, one by one. It will serve as a major step towards dismantling other functional educational institutions in India. Most people who are not experts in this field, however, do not recognize the presence of Marxism and postmodernism in critical race theory. These two prior theoretical movements are complex, and both have undergone multiple transformations over time.
Power structures and hierarchies exist in all societies, and this is how knowledge gets created. All claims to truth are culturally biased and are constructed by the social power of the elites. Postmodernism takes its skepticism very far and believes that all intellectual systems, theories, and meta-narratives are mere social constructs. Critical race theory has emerged as the most powerful tool in the guise of a social theory. Wokeism is the objectivity, mainstream, culture form of critical race theory. Its rejection of rationality and science, and suppression of free speech, makes it a unique challenge to deal with. This chapter thus sets the stage to discuss the impact on India and the dismantling of the IITs. A major premise of critical race theory is that rights must be fought, not by individuals for individuals, but by groups for their members. This is not about any individual but the way one's collective identity is categorized and operates in society. While in the US, the white-black dichotomy is relevant to represent the oppressor, oppressed, the circumstances in other cultures can be more complex and multipolar.
According to critical race theory, the lived experiences of oppressed groups override any objective evidence or logic. By insulating this very lived experience from scrutiny, analysis, criticism, or refutation, one creates greater distance between communities. Besides the Dalits, the most important among them are the Indian Muslims and the LGBTQ Jod communities. The recent entrant to the arena of misinterpreters is Isabel Wilkerson, a Pulitzer Prize-winning African-American journalist and author. Wilkerson uses the term caste to serve the purpose of describing racial tensions between blacks and whites in the US. The popularity of her thesis has given caste a new meaning, making it a household word. We will explain Wilkerson's thesis and the new movement being based on it. Skin color is often regarded as a marker for caste. Most Hindu deities like Krishna, Kale, and Durga are dark-skinned.
According to Wilkerson, the relationship between caste and race is simple and direct. Caste is the grammar of racism. What is totally ignored in Wilkerson's book is King Jr.'s very explicit expressions of debt to Mohandas Gandhi. There were no such people as whites, because they saw themselves as Irish, Italians, Germans, French, and so on, and only became white in America, thanks to the caste system. She ignores the role of the 15th-16th century explorer Christopher Columbus treating the Native Americans as subhuman people by projecting his Christian prejudices. Wilkerson says that the upper castes in India wanted to preserve the purity of their blood, and in explaining the rise of Nazism, she ignores the role of the church and pre-Christian European structures. She completely ignores how the persecuted Jews found a new home in India. She normalizes Western racism as something foreign and Asian.
The four Varnas were parallel and complementary to each other, with separate internal hierarchies. The schism between American blacks and whites is being explained away by blaming Indians. Wilkerson equates Brahmins and whites by saying they are considered as the highest standard of normalcy, beauty, and so on. Wilkerson fails to problematize the hierarchical systems within European societies, both pre-Christian and Christian. The main call to action by critical race theory is to dismantle all structures erected by oppressors. There is a parallel argument for Muslim rulers, oppression of Hindus in India. In her new book, Jennifer Wilkerson argues that caste-like systems have existed in all cultures worldwide. In India, the present-day minorities, Muslims and Christians, have inherited the structural privileges enjoyed by their ancestors who ruled over the Hindu majority. None of this justifies the caste-based biases in India or elsewhere, but the proper diagnosis of a disease is the requisite first step to the development of a viable treatment plan.
Wilkerson falls into the trap of reductionism. She wants to portray caste racism as a single, overarching, universal cause of social abuses. We will show how this has been put together one piece at a time by Western social scientists backed by their powerful institutions. French government has been funding the CSH in New Delhi. The CSH houses French social scientists to study India, Indian education, and the IITs. French scholar Roland Lardinois has been at the CSH in Delhi since 2009. Lardinois has been training Indian scholars on how to apply Pierre Bourdieu's Marxist theory on culture as capital on Indian society. Caste qua caste plays no direct role, or only a minor one. It is for this group and this group alone that family seems to have replaced caste as the source of social capital. Far from the progressive erasure of ascribed identities in favor of putatively universal ones, what we are witnessing is the re-articulation of caste as an explicit basis for merit.
Ajanta Subramanian argues that the IIT graduate status depends on the transformation of privilege into merit. Adil Henry is researching higher education in India and is particularly interested in analyzing the transformation of Indian educational institutions. Adil Henry argues that caste-based discrimination is not limited to traditional caste-based occupations. Disproportionate outcomes for different groups in the job market are due to urban upbringing, working knowledge of English, inherent interest in such jobs, preparedness, and so on. The student placement rate for reserved categories is lower, and the authors suggest that it could be related to an individual's social qualities, but offers no evidence. Ajanta Subramanian argues that the IITs and other institutions of excellence in India are oppressive structures designed to propagate the subjugation of Dalits and other marginalized communities. She says that merit is nothing but caste capital, which the upper caste has deviously schemed up to ensure that their power remains intact in the zero-sum game of power dynamics. We will discuss Ajanta Subramanian's The Caste of Merit and present a rejoinder to its.
Ajanta Subramanian argues that the IIT exam and curriculum is reproducing caste hierarchies in India. We take exception to Subramanian's idea that modern meritocracy can somehow be blamed on the Indian caste system. Our issue with her work is that it feeds communalism, divisiveness, and anti-nationalism in India. Traditionally, technical knowledge in India was purview of artisans who tended to be from lower castes. The British changed all this because technical education and practice became integral to state power and economic development. Subramanian traces the history of this change that culminated in Brahmins controlling the engineering profession. Lower castes, that had the history of technical skill and knowledge, were displaced and put below the glass ceiling of upper caste engineering. Most engineers in colonial India were from upper-class backgrounds. A large number abhorred manual labor, and yet embraced engineering because it was seen as a white-collar profession of conceptual knowledge.
What may be of high value in one society may be of little, or no, value elsewhere. Accumulating cultural capital can be a route to upward mobility. An individual's family history and social class are also an integral part of cultural capital. The academic truth in the humanities and liberal arts is often a fade of gibberish, false evidence, and politically and emotionally charged rhetoric. From Marxism onwards, critical theory has been very closely linked to political ideologies. The academic cartel, like any trade union, decides which theories are approved. Entrance exam to the IITs is considered one of the most standard, objective, and neutral measures of modern meritocracy by the youth of India. She feels there are economic, social, and ideological factors that make the exam unfair to the lower castes. The underlying reason for opposing entrance exams is her adoption of the critical race theory tenet favoring equity over equality.
She is unhappy about the success of the IITs in this regard. She is troubled that many Indians own Silicon Valley companies and are angel investors favoring those with similar backgrounds. She is upset about the success of the diaspora entrepreneurs because this has become a pride of Indians. She is disdainful of IITians criticizing the underdevelopment of the Indian public sector and the underachievement of engineers based in India. She is concerned that these collaborations between the diaspora and the homeland is evidence of IITians and other Indians having subscribed to the Silicon Valley model of meritocracy. She says the upper caste Indian migrants' success is not self-made, but a success resulting from caste as social capital transferred from India. She wants anthropologists and social scientists like herself to be the ones delivering fresh ideology to the downtrodden. What is also troubling to her is that IITians have resisted victimhood branding. She disagrees with Wilkerson's use of caste as the fixed, permanent architecture in which racism plays out universally.
Ajanta Subramanian argues that the election of Hindu nationalists in India led to a reinforcement of caste power that is reflected in the diaspora. She says that the election of Hindu nationalists in India led to a reinforcement of caste power that is reflected in the diaspora. She ignores the fact that it is common for Indian parents to invest their life savings for their children's college education, which can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars. Ajanta Subramanian is a major political activist prosecuting the IITs as reproducers of caste privilege. The pattern of highly educated techies coming to the US and occupying prestigious positions has to do with the US immigration policies based on merit. If the US were to give preference to farmers, carpenters or masons, surely many would end up migrating. This chapter details how biased research driven by deep envy against the Indian American community has been causing mayhem in American workplaces. It explains the following. A new ecosystem of American activism has emerged that has been collecting data on caste in America. The US-based Equality Labs group is self-described as a Dalit, power-building, organization. It has used sensationalism and a well-coordinated campaign to become positioned as the authority on caste for American organizations.
Several issues have been raised about the methodological sloppiness and built-in prejudices that undermine the reliability of the conclusions. The US Census has never identified Dalits as a category, so it is impossible to estimate the number of Dalits in the US. The survey was distributed by Equality Labs activists to people they selected and was not representative of the broader Indian American population. Equality Labs report received extensive mainstream media coverage in the New York Times, The Washington Post, BBC, NPR, Bloomberg, and other prominent publications. Equality Labs is not registered as a non-profit organization obligated to publicly disclose finances or be subject to the same stringent limitations as imposed on political campaigners in the US. Its views on caste, Hinduism, and the Indian American community are reductive, hateful, erroneous, and even ridiculous. Equality Labs laid the groundwork for litigation targeting Indian and Hindu Americans, particularly in California. In June 2020, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a lawsuit against Cisco Systems for alleged caste discrimination. The complaint stated that Cisco had failed to prevent inequalities associated with caste status, ritual purity, and social exclusion. Cisco responded that it investigated the matter thoroughly and found no evidence of any caste-based discrimination.
We do not deny that there may well be individual instances of caste-based discrimination that take place in the American workplace. The problem with Equality Labs' proposal is that caste would become the only protected category that singles out as the oppressor. Here, Hindus and Indians are being singled out as the only category of oppressor. Any caste-related policies that are adopted in the US could be imposed on Indian contracting firms and vendors. Just like race, caste bias is embedded in institutional structures that continue reproducing caste privilege. Equality Labs has put out a call to collect information about instances of caste-based discrimination in several US tech companies. Caste has recently been designated as a protected class, a formal term with legal consequences. All kinds of US establishments will start compiling data on the castes of their employees. This will of course open the floodgates for caste experts to offer consulting to the establishments. This move, to profile upper caste Indians as oppressors that must feel guilty of their identity, would undermine all the work done over the past quarter century to fight Hinduphobia.
Members of the public waiting to testify exceeded the Commission's expectations and the session lasted almost 8 hours. During the public hearing, Vice Chairman Boren and Chairman Brian Franzen repeatedly interrupted representatives of Hindu organizations. Members of the public waiting to testify exceeded the Commission's expectations and the session lasted almost 8 hours. In California textbook issue, the Hindu right-wing groups mobilized 1,000 of people including the children to deny the practice of caste in the USA. More specifically, Hinduism and Hindutva are being explicitly targeted as the culprits behind this purported discrimination. This is tantamount to ascribing slavery and apartheid to Christianity and monitoring one's adherence to Christian tradition as a metric for determining how racist they are. Equality Labs describes itself as an Ambedkarite power-building organization. Its grassroots agenda involves targeting various expressions of Hindu faith and identity. Within 5 years, it has successfully reinterpreted the popular narratives of Indian and Hindu Americans as a successful minority community.
Equality Labs' activism is loaded with false allegations. The work of Equality Labs may have a silver lining, after all. It forces the Hindu to fight for himself or herself because the battle is becoming personal. The Chinese spoke proudly of the role meritocracy played in building the greatness and glory of China. The Indian participants tried to discredit meritocracy in India's context with a narrative of shame. They cited caste-based oppression and how it is a systemic oppression of Hindu society. Snakes in the Ganga, Breaking India 2.0 is published by Ashoka University, New York. Authors Rajiv Malhotra and Jyotirmay Tripathi argue that caste is reconstituted in technical science education and meritocracy produces inequality based on privilege. They argue that extended protection to a section of the population actually disempowers it because many skills are lost in the process, and it is rendered incapable of becoming self-sufficient.
This has huge legal and political ramifications in the United States. Ramifications are coming through the American multinationals to their subsidiaries in India. It should concern Indian technocrats and industrialists worldwide. There is diversity in every aspect, social, linguistic, and caste. A Brahmin from the state of Orissa will have a different lifestyle, privilege, social ability and skill compared to a Brahmin from Karnataka or Tamil Nadu. Caste is not the same as race in America, because there is a clear distinction between black and white. Subramanian's ideas are obsolete and make good rhetoric at Harvard University because there are guilty whites who make a good audience for her.
Anti-meritocracy means loss of competitiveness and hence, Indians will become slaves and live in poverty. To fight against the principle of merit as something anti-democratic is a vicious attack on the survival of a culture. Overall, the scholarship is biased and sloppy, to say the least. Tripathi criticized anthropology as a discipline obsessed with otherness, focusing on studying people who look different, eat different, speak different, and dress different. Haral Malhotra said Subramanian is playing the Harvard rat race in which they approve of a brown-skinned person attacking his or her own traditions. Jalihal felt that Subramanian is reproducing the Orientalist scholarship that portrayed India as a hierarchy sanctioned by the Vedas. A certain set of assumptions about India has been turned into a formal framework. Laws are being filed against companies where Indians are working. Harvard has already enacted an official policy that casteism is racism.
Tripathi felt that the IIT community had this aura of working on wonderful technology that would speak for itself. He felt that the IITians do their engineering and sciences well but are unprepared to respond to such situations. He sees the IITs as elite institutions based on merit, and not elitist based on privilege. India is now the prime target for what amounts to a recolonization of its institutions across the broad spectrum of society. The overarching framework mandates the integration of environmental protection and social justice in all walks of life. The sustainability model based on Western universalism also privileges victims based on oppressors and oppressed. We are seeing two parallel, but intercoupled, developments in universities. One is the spread of officials and administrators. The other trend is the establishment of SDG offices in leading universities. The UN has a strategic plan to push forward these social sciences models and use them to meddle with the hard sciences.
A powerful weapon controlled by social scientists comprises toolkits by which STEM research and education as well as corporates are to be scored and rated. In the case of universities, social scientists have been developing scoring methods like the Interdisciplinarity Sustainability Index, a social credit system for STEM researchers to measure their collaborations. Researchers of STEM have been busy with their heads buried in their research while the woke mob has slowly entered STEM HEIS in the US. The Chronicle of Higher Education declared the Stanford Conference to be a threat to democracy. Scholars at the conference predicted that existing prestigious institutions like Stanford were so badly infected with wokeism that they could not be resurrected. The politicization of hard science was the thing that was newest to me and I think was most shocking. Professor Lawrence Krauss spoke on Is Woke Science the Only Science Allowed in Academia? He gave numerous examples of how the National Science Foundation, the U.S. Department of Energy and other major grant-giving institutions have changed their priority from focusing on science and problem solving to giving grants using the D lens.
Researchers who dissent get demonized, ostracized, and even fired. The Higher Education Sustainability Initiative has already penetrated the IITs and the IIMs. Invest heavily in Vedic social sciences, not based on chauvinism or taking pride in the ancient past. India's Chief Justice, D.Y. Chandrachud is already questioning the entrance exam criteria for engineering admissions. If left unchallenged, such persons will open the floodgates for Marxist social engineering.